Now, on CHM Revolutionaries.
So it wasn't so much a decision that I made. It was like, am I going to choose A or B? It was something that you couldn't not do. And that's kind of the thing that led me. It's like, okay, there's really no choice.
It takes vision and commitment to create educational opportunities today that will make the world tomorrow better. Coursera co-founder Daphne Koller and GoldieBlox founder Debra Sterling have created companies to do just that. Koller and Sterling joined CHM's Marguerite Gong Hancock to discuss the challenges and rewards of building businesses and to share their advice to aspiring entrepreneurs.
This is a dazzling duo here to be talking true Wonder Women in their own arenas of expertise and experience. I'd like to start our conversation by asking both of you to reflect on your childhood and how and when did you really kind of get the idea, the inkling that science or engineering might be of interest to you. Daphne, why don't we start with you?
I'm afraid to say that I have been a geek since my early childhood. I loved books, I loved reading. My dad used to go on trips abroad and bring me math workbooks as a gift. And I, read back, this is pre-internet, I'm afraid, I'm dating myself, but I used to read those Time Life books that had those beautiful color pictures of science experiments, cover to cover. I went through the entire series, and so I've always been interested in math and science.
Great. Debbie, how about you?
Looking back, I think the first time that I got interested in engineering was my freshman year of high school. We had to do a science fair project, and I remember the teacher kind of bribed us and said, whoever wins first grant in the science fair gets an automatic A. And so I was determined to get that A. For my science fair project, I decided to do a project on carnival games, why can't I win? And I ended up building life-size carnival games, and through the process kind of learned the physics of these games and how they're rigged so that people can't win. And I just was obsessed with this project, and I won the first grant and I got an A. And it's funny because looking back, I never was really encouraged to do engineering or even really had heard of it or knew what it was. But at the same time, I think I always had an interest, and I think that was really the first time that that interest was sparked.
Take just a few minutes to describe what you're doing day to day so that we can kind of connect the dots from that point to what you're doing now and your passion.
Well, today I run a company that I founded called GoldieBlox, and our mission is to get young girls interested in science, technology, engineering, and math through play. And so when I started it in 2012, my insight to get young girls interested in engineering was through storytelling and characters. And my idea was to create a girl engineer character named GoldieBlox, and to tell stories about this character. And she would solve problems and help her friends by building things. And my theory was that if girls fell in love with this character and her friends, that they would want to make stuff too. And so now, day to day, I run a company that creates toys as well as books and apps and videos and animation, working toward building really a franchise around this character. So if you think about Disney Princess and the way that girls around the world get to grow up kind of living the lifestyle of a princess, GoldieBlox's goal is to do the same thing, but instead of princess, we want to allow girls to live out the lifestyle of being a maker, a builder, and a coder.
Thank you.
Today I head computing, machine learning, and data science at a company called Calico, which is an alphabet company whose goal it is to help people live longer, healthier lives. So it's a biotech company focused on human aging. And the reason I'm doing that is because I feel like biology and health is the next big data frontier. There's, up until about 5 years ago when I left Stanford to go to Coursera, big data in biology was, oh, we have 1,000 samples. That's a really large data set. And now there are data sets with millions and millions of individuals and thousands of data points or more in each one of them. But in order to really leverage that to make people live longer, you really need to have that dialogue between biologists and clinicians on the one hand and the machine learning people on the other. And if you look at the number of people who actually are fluent in both languages, machine learning on the one hand and biology on the other, it's a very small number. And much as people would like you to believe otherwise about machine learning, it is not a magic black box that you just take your favorite neural network and you toss in a whole bunch of data and just magic comes out. That unfortunately is not true. You really need the people who understand both the problem domain and the technology. And we're trying to build that at Calico with a real dialogue between those two groups, and I think we can really help people live longer, so that's my hope.
So I'd like to talk more with both of you about that catalyst to starting your first company and follow on with what you were just talking about, Daphne, with what was the kind of final point that you said, I'm going to do this? How did you decide to take the plunge? And then also talk about your co-founders, the other essential team that you joined to create Coursera. So
I think the catalyst was those, 100,000 learners per course, and the fact that it wasn't just the number, it was the fact that these were people from every country. I mean, there were 140 some countries in that first cohort. Every age group, there were kids as young as 13 and people as old as in their 80s, and every walk of life, and people with, in many cases, socioeconomic status that just would never let them attend, in some cases, any university, far less a prestigious institution like Stanford. But the number of people that I could touch directly, and not in a matter of years, which is how long medical research takes to make an impact, but in a matter of weeks or months, to really make their lives better, was absolutely, I just couldn't walk away from that. So it wasn't so much a decision that I made, it was like, am I gonna choose A or B? It was something that you couldn't not do. And that's kind of the thing that led me. It's like, okay, there's really no choice. Because one thing I learned is that you can't rely on someone else to just take up your ideas, no matter how good you think they are, and run with them and do the right thing. And so if you want to execute on something you think is important, you have to do it yourself.
Debbie, you talked about your passion for this discovery of engineering for yourself. What led to the actual founding of your company?
The first kind of breakthrough happened about 7 years after I graduated from Stanford. I had kind of a circuitous career path, doing everything from marketing to branding to volunteer work in India, and I was just sort of searching, trying to figure out what I'm supposed to do on this planet. And then one day I was hanging out with a group of friends, and we had started this club called Idea Brunch, where once every couple of months we'd get together over breakfast, and each person would get up for a few minutes and share a fun idea. So either a company or an app or like an art project or just something fun, and we'd talk about it as a group. And in that Idea Brunch, my friend Christy, who also studied engineering with me at Stanford, got up and just talked about how fed up she was that there were so few women in engineering, and she attributed her early interest in engineering to playing with her older brother's construction toys. And she said, those toys got me tinkering, they got me building. I always knew I wanted to be an engineer because I played with those toys, but why were they my brother's toys? And so her idea at Idea Brunch was engineering toys for girls. And in that moment, it was just so clear to me. I knew instantly that that was what I was born to do. And I became obsessed with it ever since. And the next morning, so at the time I was working at a full-time job at a jewelry company. And, but I knew that this was my passion. And so I spent the next 9 months kind of spending evenings, weekends, kind of side hustling. And I was afraid to kind of quit my job and do GoldieBlox full time, because ever since I was old enough to work, I've always earned a paycheck. And the thought of just going out and not making money was so foreign to me. And it was scary, and I'd just never done it before. But finally, after about 9 months, I was saving up as much money as I could so that I had enough in my bank account that I could give myself 1 year to really give it a go. And finally, after about 9 months, it was getting to the end of the year, and it was sort of like the end of December and New Year's resolution time, and I felt like I had to do it. It was all I could think about, all I could talk about. And it was actually my husband who was so supportive and just kept saying, Debbie, you gotta put a date on the calendar and stick with it and leave your job and go do it. And I finally did it, and I'm so glad that I did.
I like the way that both of you describe this as something you can't stop thinking about and you couldn't not do it, right? That's fire that's in you. So that fire comes for entrepreneurs, and then there's the challenges. For entrepreneurs in the audience who are kind of looking at what comes after the start, can you describe some of the early challenges that you faced when you were first figuring out the model for your company, thinking about that? Early challenges, and how did you face them for Coursera?
Well, our founding team was effectively entirely academic. It was my co-founder Andrew and myself and a bunch of students who had worked on some of the earlier incarnations of the system, the platform that we built at Stanford. And none of us knew anything about how to run a business. So fortunately, my husband was an entrepreneur, and he gave us some bits of advice. And we were also fortunate in having been able to raise some money very early on, in fact, before the company even got started. But all of the things that we had to learn, it's like at some point, my husband said, so have you gotten insurance yet? It's like, insurance? We need insurance? What do we need insurance for? It's like, well, workers' comp and all sorts of, oh, okay, we need that. So, I mean, there were all sorts of things that just seemed obvious and we didn't know anything about, and that was one piece of it. But I think maybe more fundamental is that at the heart of our business model was that fact that we were going to the best universities in the world, places like Stanford and Penn and Princeton and Michigan. Those were our first 4 founding partners. And asking them to do, think about it, we're asking them to take the stuff that's at the core of their existence, their faculty, their content, their brand, for which they charge tens of thousands of dollars, and give that to anyone around the world for free. It's like, what? You've got to be kidding me. I mean, it was kind of like an inconceivable idea for most of them. And there was a lot of angst, as you might imagine, on the part of university administration, on the part of the faculty. And like, why should we do this? What's in it for us? And coming up with that compelling case that combined both the social mission aspect of it, which we felt very strongly about, but also fundamentally, there was a pragmatic reason for doing this, and coming up with that message of, for instance, this will give you huge visibility and attract a lot of amazing students that might not have heard about your institution, prestigious as it might be, was a compelling message. And so that helped us get some of them on board. But I think it was a combination of, I would say, sort of the positive incentives on the one hand and fear on the other, because when they saw that the digital revolution was in fact coming and was likely to hit education in similar ways perhaps than it had hit journalism and other content areas, it's like, well, you could either be on this train or it can fly by and you can remain on the platform watching it. And which would you like to be? Would you like to be leading or following? And I think that combination of there is something in it that really will help you, and do you want to be setting the course or not? And that really helped us overcome some of that earlier resistance.
Great, thank you. Early challenges and how you face those down.
Well, I think that the very first challenge that I faced was just the concept itself. At the time, after that idea brunch, it was in 2011, and in my mind, I went to the toy store the next day and saw the pink aisle and the blue aisle, and I couldn't believe that all the smart kind of building toys were in the blue aisle with boys on the front of the boxes, and the pink aisle had all the princesses and fairies and dolls and ironing boards. And I just couldn't believe that that was still the way things were. And so in my mind, it was so obvious that, of course, there should be engineering toys that girls like to play with that appeal to them, and it was an absolute no-brainer. But in the early days, after making some of my very first prototypes, I went to the New York Toy Fair, which is the biggest industry trade show that happens every year, and I was hoping to go and show my prototypes to people, and I was really looking for a mentor. And that was when I faced my first challenge and kind of realization that the toy industry is controlled by white men who they looked at me like I was crazy. And they said, don't you know that girls like dolls and boys like building? And they said that you can't fight nature. And they genuinely believed that there are innate play patterns and that girls are just never going to want to play that way. And I was pretty shocked and kind of leaving there feeling really dejected and starting to question myself. But what ended up happening was right after the toy fair, I actually went to a conference for social entrepreneurs. And that's when I surrounded myself with a bunch of young people who are really passionate about changing the world and wanting to start companies. And I got up in front of the room and presented my idea to them. And rather than the sort of rejection that I faced at the toy fair, I actually had a room full of 100 people who stood to their feet cheering. And I had a line out the door of people who wanted to get involved. And that was my first sort of test as an entrepreneur, was having the ability to kind of let these people get involved and figure out stuff for them to do. And all of a sudden, every day, 7 days a week, 24/7, I had these volunteers coming in and out of my house, helping me make prototypes, test them with kids, make iterations, and they were just doing it with their free time because we all sort of shared this passion that we wanted to change things.
I love that both of you talk about this very mission focused on changing the world, literally. We're in one part of the world here, sitting in Silicon Valley, and many entrepreneurs have talked about sort of the special ecosystem that's here. What was it that led you to start your company here and not go somewhere else, and then to stay here? And were there parts of the ecosystem that supported or maybe even inhibited you as an entrepreneur? Let's start with you, Debbie.
Well, at the time that I started GoldieBlox, I was living in San Francisco, and I feel really fortunate that I was here in the Bay Area. I think for starters, I can't think of many other cities where a group of friends would have an idea brunch, and that half of my friends in the room are entrepreneurs who have started their own companies, and it feels like here in the San Francisco Bay Area, you can throw a rock and and hit an entrepreneur, and so it just feels like it's just normal here. And so I think that part of my building the confidence to even think that as a first-time entrepreneur, that I could go do this, I think because of the culture here, it seemed like a normal, reasonable thing to do. And then I think another big asset was things like the Social Entrepreneurship Conference that I attended and many other events where I got to meet people. There were many mentorship programs that I utilized that are here. Many investors and startup advisors and other people that, all along the way. Now, I think now GoldieBlox is about 5 years old, but just access to other entrepreneurs who have companies that I can meet with, and nothing replaces being able to sit down with another CEO of a startup and share war stories and get tips and tricks and that sort of thing. So I think it's really the best place in the world to start a company.
Great.
Yeah, I can echo a lot of what Debbie said. I too was living here in the Bay Area, and a lot of our founding team came from Stanford University, and I think in many ways that's what makes the Silicon Valley what it is that proximity to the amazing talent that comes out of those great universities, Stanford, Berkeley, and some of the other ones that are a little further out. And it's just an amazing place to recruit talent and young people who come out with this amazing commitment to doing something that is both innovative on the one hand and transformative on the other. And it comes back again to as a testament to the power of education. And I think the fact that we were so deeply embedded within the local ecosystem, first on the Stanford side and the network of connections that we had with some of our wonderful colleagues at Stanford University. And then on the other side, the broader ecosystem of entrepreneurs and investors and so on. It would have been, I think, quite challenging to start Coursera anywhere else. So we're very lucky to be able to be here.
I'd like to talk to you about kind of scaling up. You experienced this rapid growth. Start with you, Daphne, of all these viewers, and so you have this challenge of scaling and figuring out what. Talked about that transition from startup, scaling, building, and that role of becoming an executive during that time of incredible growth.
Yeah, no, that was definitely a challenge. We started out with this homegrown platform that was written at Stanford University literally in 6 weeks. So we decided in the middle of August of 2011 that we were going to do this experiment, and the plan was to launch the courses at the end of September. And so it was 6 weeks of time, and then we realized that we had no idea what kind of traffic we were going to get, but the platform that we had was really built much more, the platform we had at the time that was built at Stanford was really built much more for a few hundred people. And well, we might get more than that. So we ended up having to rewrite that whole platform from scratch. It was one grad student and 3 undergraduate students who basically in 6 weeks wrote the platform, but it was really held together with chewing gum and baling wire. And then I will say, I'm very proud of well, very proud of them. I had very little to do with the actual work on that, but they deserve a tremendous amount of credit because despite having the unbelievable number of, a couple 100,000 people on the platform, we didn't crash once. But that was a couple 100,000 people, and then we kind of went and we rewrote the platform to be more robust. And but by the following September, so we launched Coursera in January. By the following September, all of a sudden we had 1 million people, which seemed like a lot of people at the time. And there was no way that even that second generation platform, it was literally sort of straining at the seams, and we were starting to get crashes and such. And so we really had to divert all of the engineering resources to building up a brand new platform, which, by the way, we've done twice since then, as we went from 1 million to 10 million, from 10 million to 30 million. Each time you need to engineer to a new level of robustness and sophistication. And it was exacerbated by the challenge that we had commensurate growth on the number of university partners. When we made the original set of predictions to the investors of how quickly we were going to grow, we said, well, maybe by the end of 3 years, we might have 12 or maybe as many as 15 university partners. And within, I think September of 2013 or November of 2013 is when we had our 100 partner launch. And the problem with university partners is, as you might imagine, these are some of the world's top universities, and we were international by then. So we had universities at that point, I think, from 5 different continents with 7 different languages. And each university is a snowflake. They are each very, very special to themselves. And they have, and by the way, I love our university partners. They're tremendous. And so when you are re-engineering the platform to be better and more robust, it's one thing if, individual learners kind of complain that you haven't added any new features recently, and, that's not great. But when the president of a major university calls you and says, well, you promised us this feature 3 months ago, and you're way behind, it's like, okay. So that sort of tension between a number of very powerful and valuable partners and really needing to scale and build up while also dealing with all of the incoming requests is I think, an interesting challenge. And it is, I think, one that most two-sided marketplaces have to deal with. But many of the two-sided marketplaces have a lot of partners on both sides. So, if you go on eBay or Amazon, there's lots of buyers and lots of sellers. We didn't have a lot of partners because there aren't that many top universities around the world, and so each one was precious. And so dealing with that ecosystem of not large, but also not so small that you could please every single one of them, set of partners was, I think, one of the challenges that we really faced in scaling as quickly as we did.
It's a very complex situation. Debbie, describe the growth of GoldieBlox and some of the experiences that you've had in scaling.
Well, the early days, it started in my apartment, just kind of sketching prototypes. And the very first toy prototype that we launched was called GoldieBlox and the Spinning Machine. And it was an illustrated storybook about Goldie, the girl engineer, building a belt drive to help her dog chase his tail. And it came with a construction kit with a pegboard, wheels, axles, ribbon, and little character figurines that you put together. And so I wrote and illustrated the storybook, and I designed all the toy pieces, and had to work with sculptor to make the little figurines, and I was working with a manufacturer over in China to start the tooling and making all the pieces. And the goal was to do an initial production run, and the minimum order of that is 5,000 units. And that's typically with hardware the way you get started. And so I launched GoldieBlox on Kickstarter, hoping to crowdfund this initial production run. And the Kickstarter campaign ended up being really successful, which was great. And we had about 5,500 backers, which was about the size of your average initial production run. So everything was kind of going smoothly, and I was starting to make like my first couple of hires, and we're all going great. And then the Kickstarter video ended up getting picked up by this company called Upworthy, which none of us had ever heard of. And it went insanely viral, like practically overnight. And the Kickstarter had already ended, but we had a Shopify website, so we were still selling pre-orders online. And before we knew it, we had done almost $1 million in pre-orders of this toy that we, were like kind of getting ready to make this first initial production run. And all of a sudden, it went from having to make this 5,000 unit order to having to produce 40,000 units, and we were already behind. And so, and then the demand just started to increase. Toys R Us wanted to carry it nationwide. Like hundreds of stores are calling us, they want to carry the toys. Like, when's the next one coming out? When's the next one coming out? And so I think that the key really back then was just quickly finding somebody to do all of the things that I had done. So I had done all the illustrations. Now I had to hire 2 illustrators to do that. I had written all the books, couldn't do that anymore, had to hire a writer. Like each component, just finding somebody to fill that in and being able to let go, of something that you really enjoyed doing, so that you could find really great people who are better at you at doing like each individual thing. And so that's really been, that's really what you do in order to, it sounds really simple, but that's what we did.
I'd like to follow that up. A natural line that goes for an entrepreneur that's successful is to go from being a solo or maybe a small team to really needing to scale and lead large teams, recruit, retain, manage. Can you describe some kind of a turning point, a decision that you needed to make as a leader, and something that could help other people who are kind of in leadership positions, some sort of a takeaway of a leadership decision that you've made in that role of leading your team? Let's start with you, Debbie.
Well, I think, one key point really early on was, as you can imagine, with the company kind of going viral so quickly and all the orders coming in, and it just continued to balloon, and we're just running like crazy, hiring people left and right. We're just trying to fulfill the orders. Things started to come up like employees wanted to know, like, what's my career path? And like, what are my goals? I'm like, what are you talking about? We just need to get the toys in and out. Like, what is this? And I think really early on, just starting to realize that, questions like building company culture and like, how do you figure that out? And that's something that I wasn't thinking about initially. I was just trying to like get the toys made and shipped. And I think that really early on, there was a huge wake-up call for me, because my leadership came into question by my staff, in particular my executive team, that pulled me aside and said, we don't think you're doing a good job. And that's a really tough thing to hear as a first-time CEO. And the truth was, we were starting to face some real challenges. And up until that point, things had been kind of easy and everything was going great, and our first challenges started to emerge, and I didn't know what to do. And rather than kind of openly communicate and kind of get on the same page with my exec team and then communicate that out to the staff and kind of let everybody know, hey, we have this challenge, but don't worry, we got a plan, this is what we're gonna do, we're gonna figure it out together. Rather than figuring out kind of how to communicate that to everybody, I was just trying to kind of figure out everything by myself. And not communicate to people, and just kind of handle it on, try to handle it on my own and get everything done on my own. And as a result, when you're not clearly communicating but things aren't going well, your staff just kind of makes up their own narrative about what's going on. And that's when the rumors start to fly. And so I learned the hard way really early on that in order to be an effective leader, I needed to figure out how to be a really good communicator and almost over-communicate with the team. And right away, I started doing executive coaching, which was transformative for me. And I was really glad that I figured that out early on, because I think if I hadn't, I still wouldn't be the CEO of my own company.
Thank you for sharing that. Daphne, what do you have to add?
Well, I think a lot of what I'll say echoes comments that Debbie made. First of all, as it relates to company culture, I'd never even thought about the notion of culture, and the concept didn't exist as an academic. You kind of went and you had your lab, and then when I started Coursera, I remember one of the first people that I interviewed asked me, so as CEO, what would you like Coursera culture to be in? I remember scratching my head internally, not physically, and saying, what is culture and why do I need it? I mean, you go to work, you do your work, you go home at the end of the day, what more is there? And I think I now understand much better how different company cultures can be, and I don't need to tell this audience about some of the interesting examples that Silicon Valley has to offer in terms of different kinds of culture, and how important it is to be thoughtful and proactive about that, rather than just kind of assume that the right culture will emerge on its own organically, because it doesn't necessarily, and I think it's just really important to be thoughtful about that. The other comment, also echoing, I think, a comment that Debbie made, is that, again, maybe coming from my past as an academic, there's very little mentorship that goes on in academia. I mean, once you finish your PhD, I remember when I showed up in my Stanford position the first day, and they said, your office is around the corner, there's the key, you start teaching on Tuesday of next week, good luck. And here's the curriculum that the previous person who taught the class has been using. You can use it or not, and so you kind of figure stuff out on your own, and that might be okay as an academic, although I will say that my first generation of students in my class, I'm sure, does not remember me fondly because that week to prepare wasn't all that great. But when you get into a business setting where things are just moving so incredibly quickly, And there's so much that you have to deliver on for your employees, for us, for our learners, for our partners, and there was just so much that I needed to figure out that I'd never done before, and I thought I could figure it all out by myself. That is, I figured it out as a Stanford professor, so, you know, logic will get us there. And I think one of the things that I wish I could have done differently is to realize earlier than I did that it's really useful to hire one or more people who've been there, done that, who've been at startups, who've scaled companies, so that there is someone on the team that you can look at and say, how did you handle that when this happened to you at your previous company? And building a strong and cohesive executive team where there's real trust and also a diversity of different experiences and knowledge, I think is really important to the success of a startup. And no, you cannot do it all yourself.
I'd like to ask you about where you see education and technology, how it's shifted since the time that you started your company, and what do you think are some of the hardest challenges that you think that your companies can help be solutions for going forward? Let's start with Coursera.
When we started Coursera, one of the things that we were able to do at Coursera was develop the recognition that education, just like everything else, is being transformed by technology. But if you ask about challenges, I think one that remains is it's not just about the digital experience. Education is, I think, fundamentally a social interaction between one learner and another learner, and between the learner and an inspirational teacher who can really get them to the next level. So how do you combine the best of both worlds? How do you create an educational experience that has that personal connection between people and the inspiration and perseverance that comes with it, while at the same time also leveraging the best that technology has to offer, which would, I think, used correctly, help us solve some of society's most challenging problems. And specifically, if you look at many of the problems that plague developing countries, and it ranges from obvious things like unemployment and malnutrition, through extremism, through premature birth, through anything that you want, even AIDS. You take any country and you stratify by education, and as people become more educated, the problems largely disappear. Debbie will probably refer to that as well. There's a lot of countries where girls just don't get education at all, and less than 40% of girls even get to go to school past the age of 8 or 10.
Well, I guess I'll start by saying that when I first became really passionate about the idea for GoldieBlox, it was really just because I was annoyed at how few women there were in my engineering classes, and my memories of being one of the only women and kind of being sometimes ridiculed by my male professors or sort of treated poorly by my male classmates. I mean, that was something that had always just really bothered me, and I really wanted to change that. And so that was initially what fueled my fire. But then as I started to research it more and get more and more deep with GoldieBlox, all of these other statistics started to emerge that were really troubling to me. Like only 14% of engineers in the US are women, and that's a statistic that globally, is still abysmally low. Less than 25% of college grads who are women in STEM fields. And girls start losing interest in science and math and engineering and losing confidence, as young as age 8. And so to me, as I think about the opportunity and what we're really focused on at GoldieBlox and the change that we're trying to make is one, how do we tackle this problem for both girls and minorities? And, and I think with GoldieBlox, we're constantly obsessed with, are there different ways to introduce these topics that are really going to engage girls? And we think about that all the time. And then as a result, some of our solutions end up engaging boys as well, which is great, but at least we've checked the box that we're making sure that we're getting girls excited about these subjects too. And I think that because we've made that our goal, we've really come up with some novel and innovative solutions to that we're seeing really great results. And I think one of the biggest solutions to it that we've found is really through role modeling and storytelling and narrative as a way to really entice and engage girls, as well as sort of giving the message to what every little girl wants to do is she wants to help people and make the world a better place. It's a wonderful thing about young girls, and yet the way that engineering has often been presented is just this intimidating, like confusing word that no one even knows what it means. By sort of almost rebranding engineering and sort of presenting it to a little girl as this can be an outlet for you to help people. If you get into engineering and technology, you can save lives. You can make the world a better place. Just repositioning it. I think the biggest challenge that we have that I'm trying to tackle with GoldieBlox is just getting girls interested in the first place, because I think that they have the ability. We just need to get them interested.
Given the climate, not only statistics, but also a lot of stories that are being told nationally as well as here in the Valley about challenges for women and the gender gap. Let's have that conversation. I would love to hear if you've experienced personally or seen others specific challenges as being a woman as an entrepreneur or in your field.
So the stories that we're hearing are just horrifying, and I have to say that at least for the most egregious aspects of the stories that we're hearing, which I'm sure are true, I haven't personally experienced them, and which I'm very lucky. But there's definitely a lot of the less overt but still quite clearly present forms of discrimination that occur against women in tech, and I'm sure in other disciplines as well. So it ranges from, I don't know if I should even call it the little things, but for instance, an anecdote that I'll share is I was scheduling a meeting with a CEO of a major company, and the introduction email that was sent clearly identified me as the president and co-founder of Coursera, and then I responded to that nice introduction email and say, I'm really looking forward to meeting you, and James, my assistant, I happen to have a male assistant, will be in touch to schedule logistics. And the response I got back was, dear Daphne, can you please tell us James's availability for the week of so-and-so? And that was not the first nor the last time that happened. And so that's one example. Another common occurrence, which I'm sure many women face, and I've certainly faced, is when you're sitting around at a table with a lot of typically male colleagues, and you're the only woman, and you come out and say something, and the conversation slides by as if you said nothing, and 5 minutes later, amazingly, a man says the exact same thing, only with a male timbre. And people are like, what a great idea, John. And you're really in a bind at that point, because one option is to say nothing and have this continue, and as usual, not get any kind of credit for ideas that you come up with. And the other is to say, well, I said that 5 minutes ago, and you come across as being shrill and strident, which for women is like horrible words, as I'm sure you know. And so what do you do? So there isn't any great answer to either of these events, because it's very hard to navigate between looking overly aggressive, which, as I said, is a horrible thing for a woman to be called, and just being so passive that things just pass you by. So I don't know if I'd call it best practice, but one thing that I've done that I think is somewhat successful, for instance, in this latter context, is to say, thank you, John, for elaborating on my previous point. And then you continue, and then you manage to sort of make that point without looking like you're just sort of claiming credit. So I don't know, that's one thing that I've done that I think is at least somewhat helpful in this regard.
I think that the first time that I experienced the culture, if you will, of this was at Stanford. As soon as I declared engineering as my major, and most of my classes were predominantly male, and there was this culture of kind of intellectual elitism, and this idea of we have to weed out the weakest, and only the highest IQs and prodigies like Daphne belong in here. And for somebody like me who had no engineering education in my entire K through 12, I felt completely intimidated, and I didn't feel like I belonged, and I wasn't acing every class, and I was struggling, and the material I found very challenging. And I think that I felt that my male classmates didn't think I was good enough. And for many years, I didn't think I was good enough. But I was stubborn enough to stick with it anyway, and I was interested in it enough, and excited and passionate about the opportunity for engineering to change lives that I stayed with it. And then going into entrepreneurship. In the early days, I went to many entrepreneurial meetups. I applied for a tech accelerator program that was very male-dominated. I was very excited because we had made it to the final round of interviews, and I showed up, and again, I was one of the only women in the room, and I looked around, and it reminded me of my classes all over again, and it was all these young guys. And I actually brought my first toy prototype with me, and it had a napkin over it. And one of the guys shouted out, "Oh, did you bring us cookies?" He literally thought, and I don't know if he said that to get under my skin, or if he literally thought like, "Oh, woman, napkin, cookies." Like, I still to this day, I don't know. But again, I didn't feel like I belonged there either, and I felt like I was almost laughed out of the room. And I think that I've never worked at a tech company before, but I imagine that there's probably at many of them a similar vibe. And I hate when I go and visit even just middle and high school robotics clubs. I feel that vibe now with kids who are 8 or 9 years old. And how do we change that? How do we change the culture? And I compare it to building company culture, right? And changing company culture, it's really hard. And I think that the only way that, I think that unfortunately this is going to take a lot longer to change than we all want. But I really firmly believe that things like encouraging more girls and women to get into engineering and tech and entrepreneurship, and once you get more of them into the funnel, more of them are going to be on the founding teams of these companies, and they're going to be setting the culture from the beginning. I also think that I'm excited to see in venture capital, which is extremely male-dominated, and private equity, which is even worse, at least now, the very few women who are there are passionate about this, and they're starting their own funds. They're getting more vocal about it, and they're trying to make a point to invest in companies with female founders, or encourage companies to have women on their boards. And I think that all of this is what it takes, in addition to just the work that I'm doing, and just really trying to inspire this next generation coming up, so that it's not so one-sided.
Can I just add one short comment to that? So while I think it's really wonderful to encourage more women to enter technology, and also to be proactive in changing the culture of the workplace, it's also something that men can contribute to. So for those of you in the room who are men, it's also on you to sort of, when someone ignores a comment made by a female colleague sitting around the table, it's a lot easier for you to say, well, Debbie said that 5 minutes ago, and I think it's something that all of us can contribute to.
Yeah, but I think one other thing to add to that is I think one of the biggest problems is, I don't know what the latest stats are, I think only 2% of women-owned companies have access to VC funding. And how are these women how do we expect these women to be successful and grow their businesses when everybody's overlooking them? And I remember very distinctly having a meeting with a very prominent Silicon Valley venture capitalist, and and this was early on, and I was pitching him about GoldieBlox and telling him how passionate I was about GoldieBlox and my vision, and he said, venture capitalists, like, we're in the job of pattern matching. And often we invest in like this particular type of founder that we've had success with in the past. He's like, and when I look at women like you look like an attractive woman who, maybe would be a good spokesperson. And I at least appreciate that he was honest in saying what most people probably think. And I've done my homework to learn how to pitch my business to an investor, and it's different than how you would pitch it on TV. And I've had to learn that. But I think that investors need to learn how to change the way they think about pattern matching so that they can, really benefit from these bright, amazing young women who have great ideas and may be different than the types of people they've invested in the past, but not to discount them for that.
Hear, hear. Thank you to both of you. Here's some questions from our audience. The first is, so what are you focused on for this year and what's ahead? What's next? Let's start with you, Debbie.
Well, we have been focusing quite a bit lately on growing the GoldieBlox brand and character. In particular, our character's Goldie, who is actually the first girl engineer children's character, and Ruby Rails, who's her best friend and the first African-American coding character for children. Which is so crazy that there weren't these characters in children's entertainment before. But anyway, we're really focused on building up awareness amongst kids of these characters. And the recipe that we found, the most success in that, and that we're really spending a lot of time and energy that I'm really excited about, is on YouTube. And so we're creating a ton of shows on YouTube starring these characters, building things, hacking, making robots, failing and learning from failure and keeping at it, and we're really excited. We're starting to grow quite a big kid audience there. So check out the GoldieBlox YouTube channel because it is pretty fun.
I'll second that. Check it out. It's very fun. So Daphne, you've returned to science and are now at Calico. We've spent much of the evening talking about your role building Coursera, but now you've returned to applying AI, machine learning to bio. What are you focused on for this year and ahead in this role?
So I've been at Calico for just a little over a year, and I spent most of that year building an amazing team of just remarkable people who really can bridge that gap between data science, machine learning on the one hand, and biology on the other. And now I think we are really starting to look at some of the remarkable data sets that have been produced over the last 5 or more years. And biology is really at the cusp of a transformation. There's been technologies, even just in the last 5 years, that have just emerged as huge enablers for data production in science. And it ranges from next generation sequencing. If you remember the first human genome, we were talking about $100 million, and now we're talking about $1,000 per genome. And it's going to be 100 in a few years. And that's just an amazing enabler to collection of large amounts of data. And there's CRISPR and microfluidics and robotics. And so one of my favorite statistics in this regard is from a paper that came out 2 years ago called Big Data, Astronomical or Genomical. And it makes the point, which I think will resonate with this audience, that if you look at the number of human genome sequenced per year from the first human genome in 2001 through today, and it's on a log scale, then it's growing linearly in a log scale, only it's growing twice as fast as Moore's law. So if you project outward from 2015, when the paper was written, to 2025, depending on whether you believe that the growth rate will continue only as fast as Moore's law or on the historical trend line, the number of human genomes sequenced is between 100 million and 2 billion. And not just human genomes. It's not transcriptomes and proteomes and electronic health records and the stuff that comes off of our Apple Watch and all of those other data streams that can really give us tremendous insight on human health. So how can we bring all that data together with the right intuitions by putting the right people in the room to give us that much deeper understanding on what makes us healthy or not healthy, and specifically in the context of Calico, what is it that for every year of life past the age of 40, which is very sad for some of us, maybe not for Debbie, but for the rest of us, that every year of life past the age of 40, your risk of pretty much every major disease, whether it's in oncology or metabolic disease or neurodegeneration, increases exponentially. What is it that we can do by leveraging the power of biological data and computation to get insight into what makes that happen and hopefully slow it down? And that's what I hope to do. It's not going to take a year, but at least to get started.
It might be in the spirit of part of our title, these Wonder Women. Aren't they remarkable? Yeah.
This show is part of At the Forefront, dedicated to celebrating women in technology and inspiring the next generation of female innovators and leaders. Join us next time for CHM Revolutionaries.